What you're about to hear isn't just a story about recovery, it's about the day a 67-year-old woman stepped out of a hospital in San Francisco and discovered that her heart wasn't the only thing that had been repaired. Stay until the end, because the man waiting for her outside wasn't her son. It was the doctor who had changed everything. The glass doors of St. Francis Medical Center slid open with a whisper, and the soft, salt-tinged wind from the bay met her face like a quiet reminder that the world still moved even after your heart almost stopped. Claire Addison, 67, held her small travel bag close to her chest as if the weight of the fabric could steady the trembling inside her. She had spent the last 6 weeks recovering from open-heart surgery, a procedure that had left her scarred, sore, and strangely awake. The hospital walls had been sterile and white, yet inside those walls she had met the most unexpected gentleness she'd ever known. Her son Ethan had promised to pick her up that morning. He had said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll be there before 9. It was almost 10. The lobby clock clicked with the kind of indifference only machines could have. Claire lowered herself into one of the plastic chairs by the sliding doors and waited the sound of her heartbeat still uneven, still uncertain in her chest. Outside, the faint fog of the San Francisco morning rolled in from the Golden Gate like a slow-moving tide. Cable cars rattled in the distance. The city was alive, impatient, relentless, and Claire felt invisible within it. When her phone buzzed, she reached for it with cautious hope. It was a text from Lauren, her daughter-in-law. "Ethan's stuck in traffic. You can take an Uber if you want. Just text us when you're home." Claire stared at the message for a long moment. "No, Mom. No, we're sorry. Just logistics." For some reason, it hurt more than she expected. She inhaled deeply, the air tinged with antiseptic and ocean salt. 6 weeks ago, she had almost died. Today, she was supposed to feel grateful. Instead, she felt like a misplaced object returned to the wrong shelf. Then she heard the voice, calm, deep, unmistakably familiar. "Mrs. Addison." She turned. Standing by the reception desk was Dr. Adrian Wells, the cardiothoracic surgeon who had repaired the artery that nearly ended her life. Even out of his surgical blues, he carried the same composed authority, a gray suit, soft blue tie, and that quiet gaze that always seemed to see beneath the surface. "Dr. Wells," she breathed. "What are you doing here?" He smiled lightly, making sure you didn't try to leave without saying goodbye. For the first time that morning, Claire laughed, a small, surprised laugh that cracked through the fog like sunlight. "Goodbye, I thought doctors were too busy to follow up in person. Some patients," he said, "make an impression." Her cheeks warmed and she blamed the cold air for it. He stepped closer, carrying the faint scent of cedar and hospital soap. "Your son called earlier," he said gently. "Told me he might be late. I was heading downtown anyway. Thought you could use a ride home." "Oh, that's very kind, but—" No argument, he interrupted, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Doctor's orders." The way he said it, not commanding but protective, disarmed her. She let out a small sigh and nodded. "All right then, doctor's orders." He offered his arm. For a moment she hesitated, then placed her hand lightly on his sleeve. His presence steadied her not just physically but in some deeper, unspoken way. Outside, the hospital's circular driveway shimmered with morning mist. A black Bentley idled by the curb, sleek and quiet. "Yours?" she asked, surprised. He gave a soft, self-deprecating laugh. "A friend insisted I borrow it. I'm more of a subway man myself." The car door opened with a muted click, and Claire slid into the seat, the leather cool against her palms. San Francisco unfolded before her as they drove the Bay Bridge stretching in silver arcs, the fog curling like breath over the rooftops. "I haven't seen the city like this in months," she said quietly. "Everything looks different when you've almost lost it," he replied. His words landed gently yet deeply. She turned to him, studying his profile, the faint lines at the corner of his eyes, the steadiness in his hands resting on the steering wheel. There was something in his calm that felt safer than any medicine she'd taken. They stopped briefly at a light near Union Square where the reflection of passing trams flickered across the windshield. She noticed the sunlight hitting his watch, the same one she had glimpsed before her surgery, as he adjusted her oxygen line. "Do you always drive your patients home?" she asked softly. "Only the ones who refuse to rest," he answered, half smiling. "And you strike me as the type who'll reorganize her entire house before lunch." She laughed again. "You're not wrong." The drive to her home in Sausalito took less than 40 minutes. When they crossed the Golden Gate Bridge, the city faded behind them, replaced by rolling hills and the glint of the Pacific. Claire leaned her head back and closed her eyes, the hum of the engine blending with the rhythm of her healing heart. As they approached her street, a quiet lane lined with eucalyptus trees, she felt a pang of unexpected sadness. She didn't want the ride to end. He parked gently in front of her house, a small white cottage overlooking the water. She turned to thank him, but he was already stepping out, moving around to open her door. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. For the surgery, she added quickly, realizing how small the words sounded compared to what she felt. He smiled. "For everything else, too, I hope." For a heartbeat, they stood there, two people on the edge of something unnamed, the morning air between them shimmering with unsaid possibilities. "I'll be back next week for your checkup," he said finally. "But you already know the most important instruction. And what's that? Don't stop living." Her throat tightened. She nodded. "I'll try." As he walked back to the car, Claire stood on the porch watching the fog drift in from the bay, soft and silver. She pressed a hand to her chest, not to check her pulse, but to feel the quiet truth beneath it. For the first time in years, her heart didn't just beat, it wanted to. What you're about to hear isn't just a story about recovery. It's about what happens when the people you loved most forget to show up for you. Stay until the end, because what Claire finds waiting on her doorstep will change the course of her life. The plane wheels screeched against the San Francisco runway, jolting Claire Addison awake. Her chest ached with that strange, hollow pressure that never completely faded after the surgery. 3 weeks had passed since the doctors at the Cleveland Heart Institute had opened her chest, replaced the failing valve, and told her she had a 60% chance of making it to Christmas. Now, as sunlight spilled through the airplane window, she realized she had no idea who would be waiting for her. The message she'd sent earlier still hung unanswered on her phone. "The flight lands at 1:00 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" No dots, no typing bubble, just silence. She told herself not to read into it. Her son Ethan was probably in court, her daughter-in-law Lauren in a meeting at Medisource, the pharmaceutical company that had swallowed most of her daughter-in-law's time. But when the minutes stretched past 15, then 30, Claire's optimism began to dissolve like sugar in black coffee. Around her, San Francisco International pulsed with motion, families reuniting, friends shouting, lovers embracing. Claire sat motionless, a carry-on bag at her feet, and her surgical pillow hugged against her ribs. When her phone finally vibrated, she nearly dropped it. Lauren first. "We're tied up today. Just grab an Uber, okay?" Then Ethan. "Mom, why don't you ever plan ahead? You can't expect people to drop everything." That one hurt more than the incision still healing beneath her blouse. She stared at the text until the letters blurred. Her son, the boy she'd raised through night shifts, piano lessons, heartbreaks, now sounded like a man scolding a stranger. Claire swallowed hard, typed "okay" with a forced exclamation point, and slipped the phone into her purse. But in that tiny, cheerful word hid something shifting inside her, a quiet crack in decades of self-sacrifice. Outside, the sky over the bay shimmered with late autumn haze. She dragged her suitcase toward the exit, wondering if anyone would notice if she simply kept walking until her heart gave out. Then the phone rang again, a voice she hadn't expected in months. Claire, deep, calm, unmistakably gentle, Dr. Adrian Wells. She blinked, gripping the phone tighter. "Dr. Wells, I didn't mean to bother you. You didn't bother me." He interrupted, that trace of Boston still lingering in his vowels. "I'm actually at SFO. Just landed from Zurich an hour ago." "Where are you?" "You're here in San Francisco." "Indeed I am. And before you protest, let me guess your family couldn't make it." The words sliced too cleanly to deny. "How?" "Just intuition. Stay where you are. My driver and I will find you." 15 minutes later, a black Bentley slid to the curb outside baggage claim. The driver, a distinguished man in his 60s with immaculate gloves, stepped out. "Mrs. Addison, Dr. Wells sent me." Then Adrian himself emerged, tall, silver-haired, dressed in casual linen and quiet confidence. The noise of the airport faded, as if the world briefly paused to let her breathe. "Claire," he said warmly, taking both her hands, "you look stronger than I dared hope." She laughed shakily. That's the morphine memories talking. He studied her face, not clinically, but with a tenderness that made her want to cry. "Still, I'm glad you're here. Let's get you home." The Bentley moved north across the Golden Gate Bridge, the city receding behind them like a memory she wasn't ready to revisit. Fog clung to the orange cables, blurring everything into watercolor shades of gray and gold. Adrian sat beside her in the back seat, giving her the same respectful distance he'd kept during consultations. Yet she felt his presence like warmth through glass. "You didn't answer my question earlier," he said softly. "Why wasn't anyone there to meet you?" Claire hesitated. "They're busy. My son's a partner at a law firm, my daughter-in-law's in pharmaceutical PR. They have their lives. And you're not part of those lives. The question landed too close to the truth. She tried to deflect. They think of me as capable, independent, or convenient, he murmured. Her throat tightened. I didn't tell them how serious the surgery was. I said it was routine. I didn't want to be a burden. Adrian turned to face her fully, his gaze steady. Claire, you nearly died on that operating table. That's not a burden, that's a wake-up call. People who love you should have been there. I suppose that's the problem, she whispered. I'm never sure who loves me because I'm useful and who loves me because I'm me. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of tires over steel. Then he said quietly, That's a question most of us avoid until it's too late. Her small bungalow in Sausalito sat on a hill overlooking the bay-white shutters, lavender bushes, and the wind chime Thomas had bought her for their 30th anniversary. The house looked exactly as she'd left it yet. Stepping inside felt like entering a museum of her own life. Adrian helped with her suitcase, then moved through the rooms with polite curiosity. Beautiful place, he said. Peaceful. Peaceful can be lonely, she replied. Samuel, the driver, returned from the grocery store with fresh soup fruit and a small bouquet. Adrian supervised like a protective general, making sure everything was within reach. You need rest, he said, finally arranging her medication on the counter. And company, at least for today. May I stay for tea? She hesitated, the polite no forming on her lips, then saw the earnest concern in his eyes. Yes, I'd like that. While he filled the kettle, Claire noticed a small pile of mail on the entry table, bills, a catalog, and one thick envelope without a return address. The handwriting made her breath catch. Thomas's handwriting. Impossible? Her husband had been gone for 18 years. Her hands shook as she tore it open. Inside lay a single folded sheet yellowed around the edges. If you're reading this, it means you finally stopped putting everyone else first. I hope you found the courage to live your life again, not just survive it. Love, T. Her vision blurred. When she looked up, Adrian was watching quietly from across the kitchen, 2 steaming cups in hand. Everything all right? He asked. She forced a smile, slipping the letter back into the envelope. Just an old reminder. Of what? That it's never too late, she whispered. He set 1 cup in front of her, his gaze still searching her face. You know, he said, most people who've gone through what you have lose faith in second chances. You don't seem like one of them. I'm not sure I know how to start over, she admitted. Then maybe, he said gently, it's time someone showed you. Later, when he left, the house felt quieter than ever, but not empty. His coat had brushed her arm when he reached for the door, leaving a trace of warmth she couldn't shake. Through the kitchen window, the fog rolled in from the bay, softening the edges of everything, as if the universe itself was whispering, rest. Now breathe. You're not done yet. Claire placed the mysterious letter beside her cup and stared at the words until the ink seemed to pulse with life. Had Thomas written it and forgotten to send it? Had someone found it among his papers and mailed it now by chance or fate? Whatever the truth, it felt like a sign, and for the first time in years she didn't dismiss the idea of signs. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Lauren. Just checking you got home okay. Also, Metasource is hosting a research gala next month. Dr. Wells might be attending. Maybe you could mention me. Claire read the message twice, then set the phone down with a faint, incredulous smile. Even in her recovery, her daughter-in-law's first instinct was networking. She turned off the phone, sat back in her armchair, and let the sound of the wind chime fill the silence. Her heart, reinforced with titanium and determination, kept its steady rhythm. Outside, the bay lights shimmered like small promises waiting to be kept. 3 weeks after surgery, Claire Addison returned home to an empty house, a forgotten text, and a letter from the dead. But perhaps in that silence, something new was about to begin. Do you think Claire should answer Lauren's message or stay silent and protect her peace? Press 0 for stay silent. Press 1 for answer her. Sometimes the hardest part of healing isn't the pain you survived, it's learning to believe that something good might still happen. Stay until the end, because what Claire decides tonight could change not only her heart, but her entire future. Claire Addison hadn't realized how quiet her little house could be until Dr. Wells's footsteps faded down the walkway. For the next few days, she moved through her routines like a ghost haunting her own life. Reheating soup, folding laundry, staring at the unopened letter from Thomas that still sat beside the lamp. The mornings came soft and fog-wrapped, the Sausalito hills shrouded in a light mist that turned everything to watercolor. Her body healed slowly, but her thoughts kept looping back to that drive from the airport, to the way Adrian's voice had settled over her like calm in a storm. He'd told her to call if she needed anything. She hadn't. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know what need meant anymore. Then, 4 days after his visit, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. For a heartbeat, she thought it might be him. But the voice on the voicemail wasn't Dr. Wells. "Mrs. Addison, this is Lydia from the Cleveland Heart Institute. We need to confirm a few details about your case. Your surgery was part of a specialized research protocol that's under review. Please return our call." Her fingers froze on the phone. Research protocol flagged for review. She'd signed a mountain of paperwork before the operation, but she'd been too frightened then to read beyond the words experimental approval granted. The memory of the surgeon's steady eyes, the way he'd said, "You'll be in good hands," Mrs. Addison replayed in her mind. And for the first time she wondered if something about that promise had been less than honest. That night she dreamt she was back on the operating table, lights glaring overhead. But when she looked down, it wasn't her own heart they were repairing. It was someone else's, someone she couldn't recognize. When she woke, her pulse raced against the pillow, her hand clutching her chest as if the titanium mesh might come loose. She needed air. Stepping out onto the porch, she inhaled the salt wind rolling off the bay. The moonlight glimmered across the water like scattered silver coins. That was when she saw the black Bentley again, parked discreetly at the base of the hill. Adrian. He looked almost startled when she appeared at the gate in her robe and slippers. "I didn't want to disturb you," he said quickly. "I was in the neighborhood finishing rounds at Marin General. Thought I might drop off some reading material." He held up a small stack of medical journals and one slim novel, The Remains of the Day. Claire smiled faintly. A love story disguised as duty. How appropriate. "I hoped you'd appreciate the irony," he said. They sat on the porch, wrapped in quiet conversation that stretched for hours about literature's second chances and how strange it was to outlive the version of yourself you used to be. For the first time in years, she laughed without effort. Before leaving, he paused at the gate. "There's a gala next weekend," he said. "A benefit for cardiac research. I'd like you to come as my guest." The invitation hung between them like a live wire. A gala, public, visible. Her instinct was to refuse. But beneath that, something long dormant flickered the desire to be seen not as Ethan's mother or Thomas's widow, but as Claire. "I'll think about it," she said softly. The following morning, she called the Cleveland Heart Institute. The receptionist transferred her twice before a weary voice answered. "Mrs. Addison?" "Yes, we're reviewing several surgical cases from your timeline. It's procedural, nothing alarming, I assure you." "Then why the review?" she pressed. A pause. There were discrepancies in post-op documentation, a few files misplaced. Something cold coiled in her stomach. When she hung up, she noticed the clock blinking 11:11, the same time Thomas used to say was lucky. But luck felt complicated now. As the days passed, the idea of the gala became its own quiet obsession. What would she wear? What would people think seeing a woman her age beside someone like Adrian Wells? Every time she tried to talk herself out of going, she heard his voice again, calm, grounded. Confident, "You could never be a burden." The night before the event, she laid a dress across the bed, soft silver chiffon, the same one she'd worn to Ethan's law school graduation a decade ago. It still fit loosely. She hesitated, then opened her jewelry box. Inside, among tangled chains, lay Thomas's wedding ring. She slipped it onto her finger, not as a promise, but as armor. When the Bentley arrived, Adrian stepped out himself. "You look radiant," he said simply. "You look expensive," she countered, and they both laughed. As they crossed the Golden Gate Bridge, the city lights shimmered beneath them like a constellation reborn. For a moment, she let herself believe that maybe this was what coming back to life felt like. The gala was held at the Fairmont Hotel beneath chandeliers that threw 1,000 soft reflections. Music swelled and conversations buzzed like champagne bubbles. Claire tried to ignore the curious glances, some admiring, some puzzled. "Let them look," Adrian murmured beside her. "They're just not used to seeing authenticity." She smiled, uncertain whether he meant himself or her. During dinner, he spoke of research, funding the ethics of experimental procedures, and how easily compassion could get lost behind corporate agendas. When he mentioned pharmaceutical companies pushing early trials, she thought immediately of Lauren's job at Medisource. "You sound like someone who's seen betrayal up close," she said quietly. His expression flickered, the first crack in his composure she'd ever seen. "I have," he admitted. "Medicine has its betrayal stories, too. Sometimes they don't end in the courtroom, they end in silence." The phrase lingered in her mind. Betrayal stories. She'd lived her own versions, the family too busy to care, the friends who disappeared after Thomas's death, the surgeon who might have used her as data rather than patient. different arenas, same ache. When the orchestra began a slow waltz, Adrian stood and extended his hand. "Dance with me." Her pulse skipped. It's been years. Then it's overdue. His hand was warm, sure, guiding her gently across the floor. The rhythm was slow, forgiving, and for the first time in decades she didn't feel invisible. Under the glow of the chandeliers, her silver dress shimmered like moonlight on the bay. She caught their reflection in the mirrored walls, not a doctor and patient, but two souls trying to remember what joy looked like. After the final song, they slipped out onto the balcony overlooking the city. Below, San Francisco sparkled like a sea of glass. The night air was crisp, scented with jasmine and salt. Adrian leaned against the railing. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm thinking about how strange life is. 1 month ago, I was in a hospital bed. Tonight, I'm dancing at a gala with a man who saved my life. And yet part of me keeps waiting for the universe to punish me for feeling happy." He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Maybe it's not punishment you're afraid of. Maybe it's permission." She blinked. Permission to begin again. Something inside her cracked open. The words she hadn't dared to speak came tumbling out. "I think I was part of an experiment, Adrian," Cleveland called. "They said my case is under review, files missing." He didn't look surprised. Instead, he sighed. "That explains a few things. I'll look into it." "Did you know?" she asked. "No," he said too quickly. Then softer. "Not then, but I will now." She studied him, the man who'd been both savior and enigma, and wondered if even he carried his own betrayal stories. The drive back across the bridge was silent. In her lap lay the gala program, embossed, elegant, meaningless. When Adrian dropped her at the house, he reached across the seat and gently touched her hand. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. "Promise, I'm a man of my word." But as the Bentley disappeared into the fog, Claire wasn't sure she believed in promises anymore. Inside the answering machine light blinked red. One new message. "Mrs. Addison, this is Lydia again. Please call us as soon as possible. There's been a development regarding your surgery. It's important." The light kept blinking. Outside, the wind chime rang once sharp and lonely, as if the night itself were warning her some truths don't wait to be found, they come looking for you. Sometimes betrayal stories don't come from strangers, they come from the people or systems we trusted most. And sometimes the heart that was repaired isn't the one that hurts the most. If you're feeling this moment, the mix of fear, hope, and what might come next, tap like to stay with Claire's journey. What you're about to hear isn't just a story about attraction, it's about what happens when love begins to grow in the shadow of doubt. Stay until the end, because what Claire discovers in that envelope will make you question everything you thought you knew about trust. The phone message from the Cleveland Heart Institute replayed in her mind long after she'd gone to bed. "There's been a development regarding your surgery." That single line pulsed louder than the wind outside. She tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself it was nothing urgent, but her heart, the literal repaired machine in her chest, seemed to thump in defiance of her logic. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Adrian's face at the gala, the calm certainty, the warmth of his hand guiding hers across the dance floor. And that brief flicker of something unreadable when she mentioned the review of her case. By dawn, Claire gave up trying to rest. She slipped into a sweater and walked barefoot to the porch where the fog clung low across the bay like a living thing. The wind chime gave a single soft note as if acknowledging her presence. For a long moment she simply stood there, breathing in the salt air. A part of her wanted to call the hospital immediately. Another part, the newly awakened reckless part, wanted to call him. And before she could second-guess it, she did. "Dr. Wells?" His voice answered, slightly husky from sleep. "Oh God, I'm sorry, did I wake you?" "No," he said, though she could hear the lie in the gentle roughness of his tone. "I was already up. I couldn't sleep much either." Her lips curved despite herself. "Then we're both insomniacs with expensive hearts." He chuckled softly. "Yours is priceless, Claire. I'm just the one who happened to fix it." The warmth in his words settled somewhere between her ribs and reason. "I need to ask you something," she said quietly. "If I was part of some kind of research, would you tell me the truth?" A pause. "Then if I knew the full truth, yes. But hospitals aren't always generous with their secrets." "Then I'll find out myself," she whispered. "I'll help you," he said quickly. "Just be careful. Bureaucracies protect themselves, not their patients." There was a silence that felt heavy but strangely intimate, the kind where two people breathed together without needing to fill the space with words. "Can I see you later?" he asked finally. Her pulse quickened. "For medical reasons." "For personal ones," he said. "Lunch." She hesitated only a moment before answering. "All right." That afternoon they met at a cafe overlooking Richardson Bay, a quiet place filled with locals reading newspapers and sipping slow coffee. Adrian looked less like a surgeon today and more like a man linen shirt open at the collar, silver hair tousled by the breeze. They spoke easily at first music travel, how strange it felt to be alive in a world that had changed while they were too busy surviving. But beneath the surface, Claire sensed the same tension she felt within herself, attraction wrapped in caution. At one point, his hand brushed hers across the table, and she felt the current of it all the way to her throat. She pulled back, instinctively embarrassed by her own reaction. "You're uncomfortable," he said softly. "No," she lied, "just surprised." He nodded as if he understood exactly what she didn't say, that her surprise wasn't fear of him, but fear of herself, of feeling too much too soon. When they parted, he touched her arm. "Promise me you'll take it easy today." She smiled faintly. "I'll try. No guarantees." Back home, the mail waited on the doorstep, a small unmarked envelope among the usual bills. Her name was written neatly across the front in black ink. No return address. Inside there were photographs, grainy, clinical, clearly taken inside an operating room. She froze when she recognized the scene, her own surgery. She turned over the first photo and saw a handwritten note on the back. "Do you know who really performed your operation?" Her stomach turned cold. There was a second photo, not of her chest, but of a man standing near the surgical table, face partially obscured by a mask. It wasn't Adrian Wells. The third photo showed a clipboard with her patient ID, and next to it initials she didn't recognize. Jr. Her hands trembled so violently she had to set the envelope down. Who would send this? Why now? And what did it mean that Adrian hadn't done the surgery himself? Her mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, none of them kind. For the rest of the afternoon, she wandered through the house in a daze. Every sound, the refrigerator hum, the clock tick, felt amplified, intrusive. At 5:00, her phone rang again. "Adrian, are you all right?" he asked immediately. "You sound off." "I got something in the mail today," she said. "Photos of the surgery. Someone said you didn't perform it." Silence. Then quietly, "Claire, listen to me. I was in that operating room, but there are things about the program I can't explain over the phone." "Program," she repeated. "You mean the research?" "Yes, and it's complicated, but I swear I didn't deceive you." His voice was sincere, that calm, grounded tone she'd trusted with her life, but beneath it was something else now, guilt. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe anyone, but the photographs lay on her table like evidence. "Come by tonight," he said finally. "Let me show you everything, please." After a long pause, she agreed. When he arrived just after sunset, she was waiting on the porch. He looked weary, almost haunted, carrying a folder under one arm. Inside, he placed the folder on her dining table. "Everything I could gather from the hospital's internal files. Redacted, of course, but enough." She opened the folder slowly. There were forms, consent, signatures, hers, and a list of attending surgeons. One name was crossed out in black marker. Jonathan Reeves, MD. Her breath caught. "Jr.," she murmured. "The initials." Adrian nodded. He was a colleague, a brilliant but reckless one. The institute put him under review for procedural violations. He was supposed to assist, but he took over my surgery," she finished, voice trembling. "I didn't know until afterward," he said quietly. By then he'd already falsified portions of the record. The board buried it to avoid liability. "And you just let them?" "I filed a report. It disappeared." Claire pressed a hand to her forehead, fighting the rush of dizziness. "So I was part of some illegal experiment." "You were part of a miracle," he corrected softly. "But yes, one built on lies I tried to stop." She looked at him, really looked, and saw the exhaustion, the regret carved into his face. He wasn't just another doctor protecting his career. He was a man trying to make peace with his own failure. "I wanted to tell you," he said, "but I didn't know how without losing your trust." Her eyes burned. "You already lost it." The argument that followed wasn't loud. It was too painful for shouting. Each word between them landed like a heartbeat too close to breaking. He apologized. She deflected. He reached out. She stepped back. But in the spaces between anger and silence, something else pulsed, not hatred, but the ache of two people who still, despite everything, didn't want to let go. Finally, he whispered, "I know this looks like betrayal, but everything I did was to protect you." She turned away. That's what every man says when the truth catches up. When he left, the air in the house felt thin, unbreathable. Hours later, unable to sleep, Claire stood by the window watching the fog roll in again. On the table behind her, the folder remained open, the truth exposed, the trust undone. Yet even in that chaos, she felt something unexpected, longing, because beneath the betrayal was still that same steady warmth, the man who'd held her hand when she thought she wouldn't wake again. And she hated herself for missing him. She reached for her pulse, counting each beat. still steady, still alive. The heart was resilient, yes, but trust. That was another matter. It started with the knock. 3 sharp raps on the door, not tentative, not polite, but furious. Claire knew that rhythm. She'd known it since her son was 10 years old and angry because she'd said no to another sleepover. She opened the door before the 3rd knock landed. Ethan. He stepped inside still in his navy suit eyes blazing. "Don't pretend you don't know," he said. "It's all over the news." The news. He shoved his phone toward her. The headline glared across the screen: "Illegal cardiac trial under review, Sausalito woman at center of scandal." Her knees nearly gave out. The photo below the headline was from the gala, her silver dress, Adrian's arm around her waist. Someone had leaked it all. "Ethan, You what? You let them use you, or did you help them?" "Help them," she repeated, stunned. "Mom, do you realize what this looks like? You're the face of a medical fraud investigation. They're saying you volunteered for an unapproved experimental valve implant. They're saying you knew. That's ridiculous. I didn't even..." "But you signed the forms, didn't you?" His voice cracked the way it used to when he was a boy, only now there was no trace of innocence. "I trusted the doctors," she said, her own voice shaking. "I trusted him." "Oh, him?" Ethan sneered. "Of course, the great Dr. Wells. The man who's conveniently in every picture of you since Dad died. Is that what this really was, Mom? A romance disguised as rehabilitation?" The slap verbal, though it was hit harder than any physical blow. "How dare you," she whispered. He stared at her, chest heaving. "You should have called me. You should have told me everything before this exploded. Do you have any idea what Lauren's been dealing with all day?" Her stomach turned cold. "Lauren, she's doing damage control. Her company's stock is tied to the Institute. She's fielding press inquiries. You humiliated her." That was when Claire understood. Lauren's company, Metasource, was one of the hospital's biggest pharmaceutical sponsors. If the trial failed, the blame would ripple straight through their corporate chain. And suddenly the leaks made sense. By late afternoon, reporters had begun calling the house. She turned off the phone, drew the curtains, and sat in the dark living room, the television flickering with breaking updates she didn't want to hear. Anonymous internal sources have confirmed irregularities in the 2024 cardiac implant program. Among the patients, one Sausalito resident, a 67-year-old widow, is believed to have received the unapproved device. Her photo flashed again, a ghost on every channel. The phone rang once more, this time an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something inside urged her to answer. Claire Adrian's voice rough with exhaustion. "Don't panic, I'm handling it." "Handling it? You promised this would stay private." "I never promised the world would stay silent," he said bitterly. "The leak didn't come from the hospital. It came from Metasource." Her chest tightened. "Lauren, I'm afraid so." Claire sank into the chair, the world tilting. "She used my name, my story. To protect their stockholders," Adrian said. "She gave them the patient list before the review board could redact it. You were collateral." The room blurred. She couldn't breathe. Her daughter-in-law had traded her dignity for numbers on a spreadsheet. And Ethan had taken her side. "Adrian," she whispered, "I can't face them again." "Yes, you can," he said. "You survived worse. You survived me." She almost laughed or sobbed, she wasn't sure which. "What now?" "Now we tell the truth," he said firmly. "The real truth. We hold a press statement. Together." Together, she repeated hollowly. That word doesn't seem to mean much anymore. That night she tried calling Ethan again. He didn't answer. Instead, Lauren picked up on the 4th ring. "Claire," she said crisply, as if addressing a stranger, "I assume you've seen the reports." "Lauren, you leaked them." A pause. Then coldly, "I did what was necessary. Ethan's partnership depends on stability. You made choices that risked his future. I cleaned them up." Claire felt her voice fracture. "You used me. You used yourself," Lauren snapped. "You wanted attention, validation, whatever it is women your age look for when they realize life's passed them by." "Don't," Claire said quietly. "Don't you dare talk to me like that." But Lauren didn't stop. "You're lucky, you know. You get to play the fragile survivor. The press loves that narrative. Family revenge stories like yours always trend for a week, then disappear. You'll be yesterday's sympathy headline by Friday." The line went dead. Claire sat there in silence, shaking. For years she'd tolerated Lauren's distance, her cool politeness, her veiled superiority. But this was different. This was war. By the time Ethan finally came by that weekend, her fury had hardened into ice. He tried to start with reason, but she could see the calculation behind every word, the same tone he used with clients on the stand. "Mom, I know you're angry," he began, but Lauren did what she had to. What she had to, Claire interrupted. "She turned me into a headline. Mom, she sold my private life to save her company, Ethan." "Stop making it about you," he shouted. Do you think the world revolves around your trauma? You almost bankrupted us with your hospital bills, and now you've dragged our name through the mud." The words hit harder than the news ever could. She looked at her son, her boy, who used to cry at piano recitals and call her mommy, even when he was too old, and saw nothing familiar. "You think I wanted this," she whispered. "You think I wanted to be famous for being a fool?" He didn't answer. "I loved you so completely," she said, her voice trembling. "I built my life around you, and the one time I needed you." She couldn't finish. He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "Mom, you're tired. You're emotional. You don't understand the world anymore. Just let us handle it." "Handle it," she repeated softly. "Like you handled Dad's estate, like you handled the truth about Lauren's affair with her coworker last year." His head snapped up. "Who told you that?" "I read between lines," she said coldly. "Mothers always do." He opened his mouth to speak, but she raised a hand. "Leave." "Mom." "Leave Ethan." He hesitated, eyes flicking with something almost like guilt, then turned and walked out. When the door closed, Claire sank to her knees, the tears finally breaking free. Hours passed before she realized she'd been sitting in the same spot, staring at the fireplace that hadn't been lit since Thomas's funeral. Somewhere deep inside, anger began to replace grief, a clean, steady flame. She reached for the phone, opened her contacts, and hovered over Adrian's name. Then she scrolled past it. Instead, she called an old acquaintance, a retired journalist who'd once written investigative pieces on medical corruption. "Claire Addison," she said when the woman answered. "I think it's time someone heard the real story, not the one they're selling." The journalist's voice was sharp, interested. "Are you sure you want to do that? Once it's out, there's no going back." "I've already lost my son," she said. "What else is there to lose?" By Monday morning, headlines shifted again. "Patient at Center of Implant Scandal Speaks Out Claims Corporate Cover-Up." The accompanying article quoted her directly, naming Metasource and Lauren Hayes as sources of the leak. Her phone exploded with calls, reporters, lawyers, even old friends pretending to care. And amid it all, one text appeared from an unknown number. "You've made powerful enemies, Mrs. Addison. Watch your back. Some family revenge stories don't end cleanly." She stared at the message until the letters blurred her pulse loud in her ears. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She locked the door, poured herself a glass of whiskey, and let the bitterness burn all the way down. The phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. Reporters, talk show producers, former friends who wanted to check in. Claire let them all roll to voicemail. She hadn't spoken to Ethan in a week. Not since she'd said the words that tore the last thread between them. And she hadn't seen Adrian either. His name appeared once on the news ticker, Dr. Adrian Wells, placed on temporary leave pending federal inquiry. She turned the TV off. The silence felt cleaner. The envelope arrived that afternoon. No stamp, no name, just her address in block capitals. Inside lay a single compact cassette and a note in tight medical handwriting. "For CA, you deserve to hear what really happened." Her first thought was that it came from a reporter, but the initials at the bottom, AW, stopped her breath. Adrian. She still owned a small tape player Thomas had used for dictation back in the 80s. It took her several shaky minutes to find batteries that still worked. When the machine clicked on, the static filled the room like distant surf. Then his voice came through, lower, younger, almost unrecognizable. "June 14th, 2016. Case number 412B, patient Rebecca Wells, age 58. Aortic rupture during reconstruction, lead surgeon Dr. Adrian Wells." There was a pause, and then the sound of breathing, labored and uneven. "I'm recording this because the board will never let me put it in writing." I hesitated. Just 2 seconds, maybe 3. The pressure dropped. I froze. My own wife. My hands, God help me. My hands couldn't move fast enough. The voice broke, and the next few seconds were only static and muffled sobbing. "If anyone ever finds this, tell them the difference between mistake and punishment is only paperwork." Claire pressed stop, her heart pounding. The man she'd trusted with her life had once lost his own wife under his scalpel. She rewound the tape and listened again, this time not as a patient but as a woman who understood what regret did to a soul. When it ended, she sat very still. Then she reached for her phone. He didn't answer the first 2 times. On the 3rd try, he picked up. "Claire." His voice was rough, hoarse. "I got your tape." Long pause. Then, "I know you blame yourself for something no human could control," she said quietly. "I know why you look at every patient like they might be the last person you can save." He exhaled shakily. "I wasn't sure you'd forgive me for not telling you. I haven't decided yet," she admitted. "But I think I understand. Can I come by?" She hesitated. "It's not safe right now. Reporters are camped outside." "Then meet me where it's quiet." At dusk, she drove north along the coast, the sea turning silver in the dying light. He was waiting at a small lookout near Muir Beach, leaning against the railing, the wind pulling at his coat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "I recorded that the night before I resigned from the surgical board. No one else has ever heard it." "Why now?" "Because I didn't want the news to tell you who I was. I wanted you to hear it from me." She studied his face, older, lined with exhaustion but honest. "You could have destroyed your career with that tape." He nodded. "It's already destroyed. At least the truth has company now." They stood in silence, the ocean below them beating against the rocks with relentless rhythm. "I read your interview," he said finally. "You were brave." "I was angry," she corrected. "There's a difference. Sometimes anger's the only way back to self-respect." She looked away, blinking hard. "Ethan hasn't called." "He will," Adrian said, "but maybe not for the reasons you hope." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I heard rumors Metasource is preparing a countersuit against you." "Me?" "They'll claim defamation and breach of confidentiality." She laughed bitterly. "So the family revenge stories continue. Only now it's corporate." He reached for her hand. "Then let me help." "For what?" "For standing beside you when they come." She almost pulled away, but his fingers were warm, steady. For the first time since the scandal broke, she didn't feel like prey. Later, they sat in his car windows, fogged from the chill. He handed her a folder. "This is everything about Jonathan Reeves, the surgeon who hijacked your operation. Internal memos, signatures, payment records. It proves Metasource funded the experiment off the books." She leafed through the papers, stunned. "Where did you get this?" "I had friends in the audit division. They wanted someone honest to expose it." She looked at him. "You realize this could put you in prison?" "I already lost everything else," he said simply. "Maybe this way it means something." The sincerity in his eyes undid her. "Adrian, I don't know how to feel anymore." "Then don't feel," he said softly. "Just breathe." She did once, twice, and felt the first real calm in weeks. When she returned home that night, she found another message waiting on her voicemail, a low male voice, distorted. "You think you're a hero, Mrs. Addison? But heroes die in lawsuits. Drop the story or your son loses his job." The line clicked off. She stood there frozen, then called Adrian back. "They're threatening Ethan now." "I expected that," he said grimly. "We'll move fast. Tomorrow I'll meet the federal investigators and hand them everything. After that, you'll be free of this." "Free," she echoed. "There's no such thing." He didn't argue. The next day, the papers ran a smaller headline: "New evidence suggests fraud at Metasource. Whistleblower doctor cooperating." For the first time, her photo wasn't the lead image. The spotlight had shifted. By evening, she drove to Adrian's house, a modest craftsman tucked against the hillside. He answered the door looking both lighter and older. "It's done," he said. "They have the files. Reeves is in custody." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The relief hit so suddenly she nearly stumbled. He caught her shoulders. "Hey, it's over." "No," she said. "It's beginning." He frowned. She reached into her purse and pulled out the cassette. "You let me hear your worst day," she said. "Now I want to hear your reason to stay alive after it." He blinked, surprised. Then slowly he smiled. "You." For a long moment they just stood there, two people whose worlds had imploded and somehow found each other in the wreckage. She felt the urge to cry again, but this time it wasn't grief. It was release. He cupped her cheek. "You could still walk away, Claire." "I've been walking away my whole life," she whispered. "Maybe it's time to stop." He kissed her gently, reverently, the way someone touches a wound that's finally healing. They spent hours talking afterward, no longer doctor and patient, but equals. He told her about the years after Rebecca's death, how he'd volunteered in disaster zones to punish himself by saving strangers. She told him about raising Ethan alone, about the quiet resentment that had built into distance. At one point she said, "Do you ever wonder if forgiveness is just fatigue, dressed up as grace?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but it's still grace." The fireplace crackled. Outside rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavy, washing the streets clean. When she finally stood to leave, he walked her to the door. "I don't know where this goes," she said. "Neither do I," he replied, "but I'd like to find out." That night, back in her own bed, Claire lay awake listening to the storm. Somewhere between thunder and memory, she realized she no longer felt like a victim. She was bruised, yes, but unbroken. She picked up her notebook and began to write. Not for the papers, not for revenge, but for herself. Forgiveness doesn't erase betrayal. It reclaims the power it took from you. Some family revenge stories end in ruin. Mine might end in understanding. She closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and whispered into the dark. "I forgive you, Ethan. And I forgive myself." The rain had stopped by morning, but the air still smelled of salt and smoke, that faint scent of endings. Claire woke to sunlight streaming across her quilt, a quietness so pure she almost mistook it for peace. Then the phone began to buzz again. The network producer's voice was bright, efficient, too rehearsed. Mrs. Addison, thank you for agreeing to speak on the afternoon segment. Viewers are eager to hear your side after Dr. Wells's testimony. My side, Claire repeated, sitting upright. Yes, ma'am, we're running a live segment, 10 minutes, just a human interest focus, healing, forgiveness, all that. She hesitated. Is this about the lawsuit? Not directly, just redemption. America loves a comeback. She almost declined, but the memory of Adrian's words last night, "You're free now," echoed through her mind. Maybe speaking was the only way to prove it. All right, she said finally, I'll do it. By 2:00 p.m., a camera crew was in her living room. They set up lights, adjusted her chair, draped a microphone cord down her blouse. The young producer smiled too widely, her perfume clashing with the antiseptic scent of fresh cables. Just breathe, Mrs. Addison. 10 minutes and you'll be everyone's favorite survivor. Survivor. The word rang hollow. The host appeared on the large monitor beside her, broadcasting from a glossy studio in New York. Claire Addison, he began, you've become a symbol of resilience. How does it feel to go from scandal to strength? She smiled faintly for the camera. I wouldn't call it strength. More like necessity. When everything falls apart, you either break or rebuild. Well said, the host replied smoothly. And where does forgiveness fit into that rebuilding? Her throat tightened. She thought of Ethan, of the silence that still lived between them. Forgiveness, she said slowly, isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of anger. Beautiful, the host said. And Dr. Wells, is he part of that forgiveness? Her heart skipped. He's part of the truth, she answered carefully. Before the host could reply, the room swayed, the lights brightened into a glare. A rush of dizziness blurred her vision. She blinked, tried to steady herself, but the words on the teleprompter dissolved into white. Mrs. Addison, the producer said. Are you? Then everything tilted. The microphone fell to the floor, her chest constricted, sharp and violent. Somewhere far away, someone shouted for help. And in that spiraling darkness, Claire heard the faintest echo of a heartbeat struggling to find rhythm. Adrian was 2 miles away, standing in a clinic hallway, reviewing paperwork for the federal investigators when his phone lit up. Unknown, caller Sausalito Police Dispatch. He answered on instinct. Dr. Wells, we have a medical emergency at your listed residence contact. Name's Addison Claire. We're dispatching an ambulance now. The folder fell from his hands. I'm on my way. But sir, the dispatcher started. You're under suspension. He hung up before she finished. Within minutes, his car tore down Highway 101, tires hissing on the wet pavement. When he arrived, the camera crew was huddled outside, pale and frantic. She just collapsed, the producer said. We called 911. They said 7 minutes. 7 minutes was too long. Adrian pushed through them, ignoring their protests, and knelt beside Claire's unconscious form on the floor. Her lips were gray. The monitor light from the camera reflected off her open eyes, unfocused, fading. He pressed his fingers to her neck, no steady pulse, just chaos beneath the skin. He looked up. Do any of you have a defibrillator? Blank faces. He yanked open the camera case, found a battery pack. Close enough. He stripped the cords, improvising electrodes. Sir, you can't. Get out, he barked. The fear in his voice cleared the room. He leaned close to her ear. Claire, stay with me. You're not done yet. Her chest barely moved. He took a breath, placed the improvised pads, and delivered a shock. The jolt arched her body, then silence. Another shock. Nothing. He started compressions, counting under his breath. 1, 2, 3, breathe, damn it, 4, 5. And then faintly a sound, the low thud of life trying to return. He pressed his forehead to hers, whispering, Don't you dare leave me. Her eyelids fluttered. Adrian, I'm here. Her voice was a broken whisper. You're not supposed to. I know. Sirens wailed outside. He leaned down again, his voice trembling. They'll take you to Marin General. Tell them nothing until I get there. Promise me, she murmured weakly. No more hiding. I promise. At the hospital, chaos met him at the entrance. Reporters already lined the sidewalk, flashing bulbs and microphones, waiting like vultures. He slipped through a side door, flashing his old ID badge before security could question him. Inside, the attending physician met him grimly. She's stable for now. Atrial fibrillation. Severe stress trigger. Adrian exhaled the first real breath in an hour. Can I see her? Technically, you're not authorized. Then arrest me later, he said, pushing past. Claire lay pale beneath hospital sheets, a monitor pulsing steady but fragile beside her. When her eyes opened, he was already at her side. You saved me again, she whispered. You saved yourself, he said gently. I just refused to let you quit. A faint smile curved her lips. You really should stop risking your career for me. He brushed her hair back. It was never about my career. Later that evening, as the storm clouds cleared, a federal investigator appeared at his door. Dr. Wells, she said, clipboard in hand. You performed an unsanctioned procedure while suspended. That's a criminal offense. He didn't deny it. Then charge me. Why did you do it? Because she mattered more than the rules. The investigator studied him for a long moment. "You're lucky." The crew's footage conveniently malfunctioned during the incident. The camera feed went dead for 6 minutes. Adrian blinked. Malfunctioned. She smirked. Or mercy. Depends how you look at it. When she left, he finally allowed himself to breathe. A week later, Claire was home again, weaker, slower, but alive. Adrian visited every morning, careful, quiet, bringing tea and the calm that always followed him. They rarely talked about the collapse. Instead, they spoke of smaller things: her garden, the jasmine climbing the porch rail, the way the fog rolled in like a blanket at dusk. But one morning she asked, "If the board takes your license, what will you do?" He smiled softly. "Teach maybe, or volunteer. Healing isn't always surgery." "You think you could live without it?" "I used to think I couldn't live without medicine," he said. "Now I know I can't live without meaning." She reached for his hand. "Then maybe that's what this was all for, to remind us both what matters." He squeezed her fingers lightly. "I'd risk it all again." That evening, as the sun slipped behind the bridge, Claire sat alone on the porch, wrapped in a shawl. Her pulse was still irregular, a quiet metronome, reminding her that time was never guaranteed. But for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of it. The bay shimmered gold. In the distance, she saw a lone figure standing near the waterline, Adrian, hands in his pockets, watching the tide come in. She smiled to herself, whispered softly into the wind, "You kept your promise." Inside the house, the TV was still on, muted. A breaking headline scrolled across the bottom. "Suspended surgeon saves patient's life in defiance of ban investigation pending." She turned the volume down, content to let the world argue. All she cared about was the quiet proof of her heartbeat under her palm, steady, stubborn, alive. The first real morning of spring arrived quietly, without fanfare. Claire Addison woke to the sound of gulls and the faint hiss of the tide against the rocks below her porch. For the first time in months, she didn't reach immediately for her pulse. It beat there anyway, steady, patient, stubbornly faithful. Her recovery had been slower this time. The collapse had frightened everyone except apparently her. Fear had been replaced by something else, a calm gratitude that lived deep in her chest like an ember that refused to go out. She moved carefully through the kitchen, still favoring the side where the incision scar tightened in the mornings. The air smelled of coffee and rain. On the table lay a newspaper, its front page headline, "A week-old suspended surgeon saves patient's life inquiry pending." Someone had written in pen across the corner, "You made headlines again. A." She smiled at the note. Adrian still used humor the way some people used prayer, quietly to hold the world together. He hadn't been by for 2 days. The medical board hearing was underway in Sacramento. He'd asked her not to come. "Too public," he'd said. "I don't want them using you as a prop." She'd promised to stay home. She had lied. By noon, she was in the car driving north along Highway 80, the bay glittering to her right. Each mile marker felt like a heartbeat. She told herself she just wanted to wait outside to be near him if the verdict broke bad. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. She parked down the street, keeping her distance, watching the entrance. The wind lifted banners from nearby food trucks, flapping like restless wings. After 2 hours, the doors opened. Adrian stepped out into the sunlight. No handcuffs, no security escort. His expression was unreadable. She waited until the crowd thinned, then called his name. He turned startled, then smiled, the weary smile of a man who'd just carried a mountain uphill. "They gave me what I deserved," he said. "And what's that?" "Freedom," he answered simply. "I resigned." They drove back together in silence, the road stretching golden ahead of them. When they reached her house, he parked by the eucalyptus trees and leaned against the steering wheel. "I thought you'd fight them," she said softly. "I did," he said. "But sometimes peace costs less than victory. I'm tired of defending what's already been taken." She studied his profile, the lines of exhaustion that softened when he smiled. "So what now?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I teach. Maybe I disappear for a while." "You're not the disappearing kind." He looked at her, and for a heartbeat the air between them held the quiet intensity of everything unspoken since that night on her floor. "No," he said finally, "not anymore." The days that followed were slow and luminous. Claire walked farther each morning, first to the mailbox, then down to the harbor where fishermen mended nets in the salt air. She started sketching again, not well, but honestly. The small watercolor pad beside her coffee cup filled with crooked sailboats and crooked hearts. Adrian called often, sometimes just to say, "You sound better today." She'd reply, "So do you." They lived like that for weeks, 2 people learning how to exist without the weight of crisis. Then one Tuesday, a thick envelope arrived from Sacramento. The return address made her stomach tighten: California State Medical Board. Adrian was in the garden when she found him. "Mail from your favorite bureaucrat," she said, handing it over. He opened it slowly. Instead of legal paper, a single letterhead from the University of California Medical Center slid out. Dr. Wells. We've followed your case with great interest. The board's inquiry revealed not negligence, but courage. In collaboration with our ethics division, we're forming a new Patient-Advocacy Initiative for cardiac trial survivors. We'd like you and Mrs. Claire Addison to serve as founding advisors. If Redemption has a curriculum, perhaps you can help us write it. He read it twice, then handed it to her. Claire, he said quietly, they want us to build something new. She blinked, tears rising before she could stop them. After everything, because of everything. They met the dean a week later in San Francisco. The university wanted a program that would bridge medicine and humanity doctors who listened to patients who spoke. Adrian would train young surgeons in empathy. Claire would teach the art of being heard. Me, she'd laughed. I'm not a teacher. You survived us, the dean said. That makes you qualified. When they left the meeting, Claire stood on the hospital terrace overlooking the city. The sun was sinking behind the bridge, painting the water bronze. Adrian came up beside her. You okay? I think so, she said. For the first time, it feels like none of it was wasted. He smiled. Pain rarely is. By early summer, her house had turned into a small sanctuary for patients who wrote her after seeing the news widows, veterans' mothers recovering from heart surgery. She answered every letter by hand. Some included photos of families, some just a single line. Thank you for saying what we couldn't. Ethan still hadn't written, but one morning an envelope appeared with his handwriting on it, careful, deliberate. Inside, Mom, Lauren left. I guess you were right about her. I've been angry because it was easier than being ashamed. I watched your interview from the hospital. You looked calm. I hope one day I can be too. Her hands shook as she read it. For a long moment she just sat, letting the forgiveness she'd already offered silently reach him across the distance. When she looked up, Adrian was standing in the doorway with 2 mugs of tea. Good news. She smiled through tears. Better than news. Beginning. That evening they sat on the porch, watching the bay darken into velvet. Fireflies blinked above the grass, and somewhere far off church bells marked the hour. Do you ever wonder why we're still here? She asked. Every day, he said. And every day I come up with a new answer. Tonight's because life didn't get the memo that it was supposed to stop. She laughed softly. You always did have a way with medical poetry. He leaned back, eyes closed. You make it easy. Months later, the first patient advocacy lecture took place in a bright amphitheater overlooking the Pacific. Students filled the seats, young, uncertain, eager. Claire stood at the podium, nervous but steady. I'm not a doctor, she began, and I don't have medical terminology to offer. What I have is a scar. A hush fell over the room. Scars aren't ugly, she continued. They're proof that something tried to kill you and failed. Every patient sitting in a waiting room is someone's mother-father partner. Treat them like a story still being written. Applause rose soft at first, then swelling. She looked at Adrian in the front row. He smiled, pride and affection folded into one quiet nod. Afterward, he joined her on stage. That he said was the best medicine I've ever witnessed. She handed him the microphone. Your turn, doctor. He looked out at the students. You just heard from the bravest patient I've ever met. I'll only add this: you can fix a heart with a scalpel, but you can only heal one by listening. The room stood to its feet. That night back at Sausalito, the celebration was simple wine soup laughter that came easily. Adrian built a small fire in the hearth. Claire curled up beside him, wrapped in an old blanket. You realize she said we just turned our worst mistakes into a curriculum. He chuckled. Redemption for beginners. Think anyone will sign up? They already did, he said. Us. She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. The fire crackled, throwing gold against the walls. For a long time, neither spoke. Then she whispered Adrian. I used to think love meant never needing saving. Now I think it's about saving each other over and over in smaller and smaller ways. He kissed the top of her head. Then we're experts. Near midnight, she woke briefly and stepped outside. The sky was clear, the bay like glass. Across the water, the lights of San Francisco blinked faintly, heartbeats of another world. She thought about everything that had led here: the surgery, the betrayal, the forgiveness, the second chance. Each had carved something out of her, but also made room for something new. Behind her, the door creaked. Adrian joined her, holding 2 cups of cocoa. Can't sleep? He asked. Didn't want to miss the sunrise. He smiled. It's coming. They stood together in silence as the horizon lightened, soft gold spreading over the bridge, the gulls lifting into the air like prayers. When the first rays touched their faces, she turned to him. We're still here. Yes, he said. And this time, not by accident. What you're about to hear isn't a story about endings. It's about how the echoes of one life can keep lighting others long after the last chapter closes. Quédate hasta el final, because what Claire leaves behind will remind you what truly matters. The sea looked the same that morning, silver, endless, patient, yet something in the light had changed. Claire Addison was 71 now. Her hands had grown thinner, her steps slower, but the calm in her eyes was the kind that only people who have fought storms earn. She sat by the window of the Sausalito house, sunlight trembling across her sketchbook. On the table beside her lay a stack of letters, notes from patients who had joined the new advocacy program she and Adrian founded 3 years earlier. One envelope, however, was different, ivory paper, handwritten, address no return, name. She smiled. Adrian never could resist dramatic stationery. When she opened it, the first line made her laugh. "Stop crying before you even start reading this." Typical Adrian. He was lecturing in Madrid this month, invited by the Spanish Society of Cardiology to speak about compassion in medicine. Your people will like that, he'd told her over video call. They still believe healing is holy work. She missed him, but not the way she used to miss things out of fear. This missing was gentle, a quiet gratitude for something that still existed even at a distance. She read on, "If I've learned anything from you, it's that legacy isn't the science we leave behind. It's the hearts we teach to stay open. Don't stop teaching." Below the words was a pressed wildflower, one of the same yellow blossoms that grew along the Sausalito cliffs. Claire closed the letter, eyes damp but smiling. Outside, gulls swept low over the tide, their wings slicing the morning sun. At noon, she walked to the small community center, where they now held weekly Healing Through Story circles. Most attendees were cardiac survivors, gray-haired, tender-hearted, carrying oxygen tanks and notebooks. She liked to begin with silence, the kind she'd learned to respect after her second surgery. When everyone settled, she said softly, "Our stories don't end when we heal. They end when we stop sharing what the healing taught us." A man in the back raised his hand. "But what if our families don't believe we've changed?" Claire smiled gently. "Then keep living like the proof. The truth doesn't need permission." Afterward, she stayed behind to clean up the chairs. One of the younger volunteers handed her a note. "Someone left this for you at the front desk." It was from Ethan. He arrived that evening, taller, grayer, but still her son. They stood on the porch, unsure whether to hug or apologize first. He broke the silence. "I heard your talk today." "You came?" "I sat in the back," he said. "Didn't want to interrupt." She took a slow breath. "You should have said something." I didn't know how he admitted. "After everything, I thought maybe I'd lost the right." She looked at him for a long moment, then simply opened her arms. He stepped into them, the years between them collapsing in one trembling exhale. When they finally sat, he said quietly, "I read Dad's journals last month. He wrote about how strong you were even before the surgeries. I never told you I got that from you." Her throat tightened. "And I never told you I forgave you a long time ago." They both laughed through tears, that awkward, beautiful laugh that only forgiveness can birth. Before leaving, he placed a folded paper on her lap. "Lauren sent the divorce papers. I think I'm free to start over." Claire smiled faintly. "Then start right. Learn to listen before you love again." He nodded. "I learned that from watching you and Dr. Wells." When he was gone, the porch felt lighter, not emptier, just at peace. A few weeks later, Claire flew to Spain to surprise Adrian at the conference. Madrid in spring smelled of orange blossoms and rain on old stone. He didn't notice her at first. He was on stage mid-speech telling a room full of doctors that compassion wasn't an elective. "And when my patient Mrs. Addison taught me what courage looks like, I realized that every diagnosis hides a love story," he said. Laughter rippled through the hall. She stood quietly in the aisle, tears shining, until he saw her. For a moment his words faltered. Then he smiled, that same crooked smile that had once pulled her out of darkness. After the talk, he met her backstage. "You broke your promise to rest. And you broke yours to keep surprises to yourself." He laughed. Fair trade. They spent a week traveling through Andalusia, white villages, olive groves, small cafes where nobody knew their names. One night in Seville, under a courtyard of lanterns, he asked, "If time stopped right now, would you be content?" She thought for a long moment. Completely. Back home months later, Claire found herself writing more often. Not memoirs, not scandal exposés, just reflections. Essays about aging, second chances, and the strange beauty of imperfection. She called the collection The Second Pulse. The publisher insisted on adding a subtitle, A Story of Love, Survival, and Grace. It became modestly successful, especially in Spain and Latin America, where older readers wrote letters saying they felt seen. One woman from Granada sent a note that simply said, "Gracias por recordarnos que el corazón también aprende." Claire kept that one pinned above her desk. On her 73rd birthday, the university invited her and Adrian back to speak to new medical graduates. As they walked onto the stage, she whispered, "Remember when I couldn't walk up 3 steps without help?" He grinned. "Now you're leading a standing ovation before you even speak." The dean introduced them as 2 people who turned pain into purpose. When it was her turn, Claire looked out over the sea of young faces and said, "We spend so much time trying to avoid heartbreak that we forget it's proof we were brave enough to love." The audience was silent. Even the cameras seemed to pause. She ended with, "If you remember nothing else from today, remember this life isn't measured by the beats of your heart, but by what your heart beats for." The applause that followed sounded like rain on a roof, steady cleansing alive. That night back in Sausalito, she and Adrian sat on the same porch where so much had begun. The sea shimmered under the moon, and the wind carried the scent of eucalyptus and memory. He poured 2 glasses of wine. "To the program, to the students, to whatever comes next." She lifted her glass. "To what we survived and to what we learned from it." They drank quietly, the rhythm of the waves matching the rhythm of their breath. After a long silence, she said, "You know, I used to think surviving was the end of the story. And now I think it's the beginning of gratitude." As the years passed, the house became filled with laughter again. Friends, patients, children of patients. Sometimes Ethan visited with his new partner. Sometimes former students dropped by. And when Adrian's health began to falter, she was the one sitting at his bedside whispering the same words he had once said to her, "You're not done yet." He smiled faintly. "If I have to leave, I'll go where the light goes first." When he finally did, she didn't collapse this time. She grieved, yes, but gently, like watching the tide take something precious and knowing it would one day return in another form. 10 years later, a letter arrived at the university's archives addressed to whoever finds this. Inside was a handwritten note from Claire Addison. "If you are reading this, know that every life will break you open more than once. Let it. The cracks are where the light gets in. Forgive the ones who didn't know how to love you right away. They're learning too, and when your heart begins to slow, don't measure what you've lost, measure what you gave." The archivist placed the letter beside a small photograph of her and Adrian standing by the Golden Gate Bridge, smiling into the wind. Below it, a plaque read, "The heart of Sausalito, where healing became love. La vida no se trata de empezar de nuevo, se trata de seguir latiendo incluso cuando duele." Thank you for staying until the end of this journey. If Claire and Adrian's story reminded you of someone you love, take a moment, share this story, leave a comment below, and tell us where you're listening from. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because somewhere out there another heart is still learning how to begin again.